To Joy Meets World. I'm your host, Joy Yugi, and on this podcast, I'm talking about my road trip, traveling around the United States with my dog Quincy, visiting all of our national parks. And today, I am going to tell you about my adventures at Great Sand Dunes National Park in southern Colorado. So we left off in Montrose, Colorado, where I visited the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. I drove 164 miles south to Crested, Colorado. It took me about 3 hours, actually round trip 4 hours, because I made a stop off the beaten path. It was about half an hour off the main road, so round trip it took me an hour. But I stopped at a little ski town called Crested, Butte, Colorado. It's about almost 9,000 feet above sea level, and it's part of the Elk Mountain Range, which is a smaller mountain range within the Rocky Mountains. It is, a friend recommended I stop there and check it out since it was on the way, and it is the cutest little ski town that you have ever seen. It looks like a version of an old Western town, kind of mixed with the town from Gilmore Girls, like that sweet little hometown. I actually, since I was there in April, it was a warm day. It was probably in the 60s. It was sunny. There was no snow on the ground. It was just a beautiful day and such a cute little town. And had the best pizza I've ever had there. They put something magical on the crust. That's why I say that. It's called Secret Stash Pizza. I would probably make a trip to Crested Butte just for that pizza. And I had the Hamptons pizza, which is like olive oil, prosciutto, Parmesan cheese, and arugula. It was delicious. It was so good. My mouth was watering just thinking about that pizza. The town is named Crested Butte for the mountain that kind of overlooks the town, which is also called Crested Butte. And it's named that because the pioneer slash explorer who kind of discovered the area saw the mountain and thought it looked like a crested butte, and that's what he named it. And then the town just borrowed the name. I would highly recommend stopping there. Definitely worth a visit. Just the cutest place and probably a really fun place to go skiing in the winter or just exploring in, the warmer weather. So I did stop at Crested Butte. That added an hour to my drive, so 4 hours total to get to Crested, Colorado. Crested is an hour from Great Sand Dunes National Park. It's actually right next to the boundary of the park, but there's no road on that side that goes directly into the park. You actually have to drive an hour sort of around Great Sand Dunes National Park to get to the entrance. It is a smaller park compared to the other ones, so there is only one entrance, I believe. Great Sand Dunes National Park became a national park in 2004, so one of the newer national parks. But it was a national monument since 1932, so they just turned it into a national park recently. I would say Crested is a good place to stay. I have heard stories from a friend who lives in Colorado that it's sort of a extreme hippie slash cult town, and some nefarious goings on have happened in Crested related to that. So my recommendation would be not to stay in town, but to stay in one of the surrounding subdivisions, which is where I stayed and had a really nice Airbnb, new, modern, small, but, definitely big enough to accommodate Quincy and I. and definitely felt safe. There were other, homes that I could see, but not so close. It was at the foot of a mountain and in the kind of desert shrub area. So I really enjoyed it, felt very safe. So I'd recommend that if you stay in Crestone, that's where you stay. You can also stay in Alamosa, which is about an hour and a half farther south than Crestone, but only about 30 minutes from the park entrance. Alamosa is definitely a bigger town, much more populated, a lot more, businesses. And I believe there are quite a few more Airbnb options there. So that's also another option that I would recommend for where to stay. The day that I went to visit the Great Sand Dunes National Park, I didn't realize it until I walked out to my car to leave, but it was windy. There were gusts of wind. So I just took note of that, drove to the park, and the wind was driving dust into the air. So if you think about the area that Crestone is in and Great Sand Dunes National Park is in, just think of your typical Western. So it's not pure like sand dunes desert, but it is definitely wilderness. It's dusty. It's tumbleweed just all over the ground. Ranches with cows just for miles on either side of the road. Just your middle of the nowhere, typical Western scene. So that's what you're driving through. So there's not much to keep the dust down. And so with the gusty winds, the dust was starting to kind of get stirred up. And you could see it in certain sections on the horizon where it was a little bit cloudy. Nothing crazy on the road for me, nothing that I felt afraid of or couldn't handle. The gusty winds did make it really hard to hike or to even spend a long time at the actual sand dunes at the park because the sand was being blown by the wind, and it was a strong wind, and so the sand would hit your body and it was stinging. It was a nice day out. It was sunny, and I would say about 70, maybe even higher. Hard to tell because of, the wind kind of feels like it messes with the temperature, but it was warm out. So, I had a long sleeve sun shirt on, but shorts on. So the sand was really stinging my legs. And so, I got to hike to the foot of the sand dunes, which was very cool. But didn't get to hike up any of the sand dunes because it was just not the right conditions for it. I'm not sure I prefer to hike sand dunes either. I mean, it's definitely a cool experience. It's something to do while you're there, something unique to do, but it is so hard. I mean, if you've ever walked in sand or ran in sand, it's super difficult. And so hiking up, 800-foot sand dune would have been exhausting, and then with the sand blowing, just not the ideal conditions. But I did get to do some hiking in the surrounding areas that aren't covered by the sand dunes. So the sand dunes are at the foot of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, which are also a part of the Rockies. And there's a creek that actually runs right at the bottom of the sand dunes, like where they start. And there were a lot of kids and families playing in the creek. It was mostly dried up at the time that I had gone, so I don't know if the snowmelt just hasn't made it down yet, or if they just haven't had any snow or rain in a long time. There are wildfires that are in southern Colorado right now. It is very dry. So there was some water, but I would definitely not call it a creek. It's almost like when the tide goes out at the beach and leaves kind of a little pond, in the depressed areas. That's what it looked like to me. But apparently that area is really fun in summer. A lot of people come and float or play in the creek, very shallow creek, at the foot of the sand dunes. That's Medano Creek. The sands, I think, just like the rest of the national parks and kind of these these areas that I visited, what really struck me about them is just how out of place they seem. So you're in, again, this kind of Western looking, feeling place with the ranches and the tumbleweed. And then you see the mountains, these massive mountains. And then just randomly, there are these, 800-foot sand dunes at the foot of the mountains. Just seemed just so extra. I mean, in the best way possible. It's so amazing that that happens and that it's just there. It does seem so random. And then, when you're up close to the sand dunes, you feel like you're on a different planet. And that's something I've experienced a lot with these national parks. You feel like you're on Mars, right? Or like just somewhere else completely, entirely. And the conditions there get so harsh and are so sort of extraplanetary that that's where NASA actually tests rovers to go on Mars. They tested at Great Sand Dunes National Park. So that kind of gives you an idea of what it's like. The dunes cover 30 square miles, and then the tallest one is about 800 feet tall. And it is, that one's called Star Dune, and it is the tallest sand dune in North America. So really, really tall and big. I, again, did not climb the sand dunes. I went up to the base of them, but there are other trails along the mountains that surround the sand dunes. So I did one called Montville Nature Trail, which kind of connected to another trail called Wellington Ditch Trail. It was about, I want to say, 3.5 or 4 miles round trip. It wasn't a loop. It was there and back. It ended at the Pinion Flats Campground, and there were campers there. And what a beautiful place to camp, because you just overlook the mountains and the sand dunes. People were just sitting out enjoying the view. Looking back at it now, it seems, I'm just wondering how those campers, turned out that night. There were some people in tents, other people, of course, in like RVs and actual campers enclosed, but the wind gusts essentially got a lot worse and blew, just continually was blowing dust. So when I left, I decided to drive 30 minutes to Alamosa to go to the San Luis Valley Brewery. And on my way, I realized, oh, this is getting a lot worse. And essentially got stuck in the middle of a dust storm. So I didn't know for sure that's what it was at the time, but you're driving, it's gusty winds, and then it's just the sky turns brown, and it's like fog, but it's brown fog, right? So you can only see, 25 feet in front of you. Your lights are on, you're going 35 miles per hour. And it was only like portions of the road at that time, like maybe a mile, and then it would clear up. And then for, another mile, it would be bad. So it wasn't too bad. I definitely thought I drove through a dust storm, but I was not, I was being careful. I wasn't too freaked out. Got to the brewery fine, had some dinner and a beer. And while I'm sitting at the bar, everybody who was sitting at the bar, our phones started chirping. It was an emergency alert that we are all getting for the area. It was called a red flag alert for a dust storm for the next hour and a half, with high winds, low visibility, and then high, fire danger, because these winds would spread any kind of fire very quickly. So, of course, we got this alert just when I'm finishing up dinner and have to drive 1 hour back to my Airbnb in Crested. So I'm literally having to drive during prime time, dust storm. And I had been gone for a while, so I felt like I needed to get back for my dog. I'm sure it would have been fine, but also I didn't really have any choice. You couldn't, It's not like I'm going to wander around Alamosa, you know, in the middle of a dust storm. I would have to stay at the brewery, but I'd finished dinner and I'm not going to have another beer, you know, before I drive home. I'm not going to have, you know, it's an hour, so that's 2 or 3 more beers, like, and I'm not going to sit there and not drink. So I just felt like I could do it and it was fine. And so I drove back to Crestone, and for half an hour, it was just gusty winds and a little bit of dust. Nothing too bad. So I thought maybe I had missed it. Maybe, you know, the worst part of it was when I had driven to Alamosa. And then I hit the last half hour, and that was the bad dust storm. Very low visibility. We were going at a crawl, lights on. I mean, the tumbleweed was just flying across the road in just huge amounts. I'm sure I still have some stuck under my car. I mean, I could always see a car in back of me and in front of me. Some cars just pulled over and I guess waited for the storm to be done. I felt like that was more, I always feel like it's more dangerous to pull over than to just get through it slowly and very carefully and staying alert. Just because, you know, you're sitting there being battered by the storm and waiting for it to decide when it's over. And also, you know, in low visibility situations when there is no, it's not a large shoulder. It's not even like a shoulder you're supposed to be pulling over on, right? Like people are freaking out anyway. They can't see a lot anyway. You know, there's a greater chance to me that somebody's going to hit you on the road. And so I just decided to keep going. I decided that was the safest bet, just to get through it, to get back to the Airbnb, not to pull over. And it was okay. You know, you just have to stay alert. You can still see, you know, you just have to be careful. And about probably 10 minutes from my Airbnb, it all cleared up. It all went away. And I don't know if it was because, you know, the Airbnb is right at the foot of the mountains. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or just, you know, the gusts were dying down. It was after that red flag warning had worn out, but we made it. I made it back, and made it through my first and hopefully my last dust storm. So that was definitely an adventure. Definitely got my experience of seeing tumbleweed, just tons of it flying around the road. It's just scary to think about that can happen in that part of the world, and how dangerous it is, especially in regards to fire. You know, I've lived in places my whole life on the East Coast where I've never had to deal with fire danger before. And it's a very real thing, you know, in California, in Utah, in Arizona, in Colorado. And it's just interesting to think about, you know, people who live in those areas, they deal with that every day. They have to think about that, you know, every day, that there's a possibility of a fire. My next stop was in Boulder, Colorado, where I met up with one of my friends, an employee of my company, and she was just telling me, you know, on the way up to Boulder, it was about a 4-hour drive from Crestone. Went super early in the morning. Still gusty winds, not as bad as the day before. No dust storms. So no dust was blowing up. A few times we hit pockets of snow, but that was only for maybe 15, 20 minutes at the most. Boulder, it was beautiful. It was in the 60s and sunny. But my friend was telling me that at the end of December, you know, Boulder had this huge fire that got out of control. It crossed a highway. Thousands of people's homes were burned. Like, this is a major city, and all of their homes were burned. They have, you know, they've been on evacuation alerts. They have like a go bag ready. They have to think about what if they're out of the house and they receive, evacuation orders and their dog is still at home. What do you do? What's the plan there? They have to give they gave their neighbor a key to go get their dog. So it's stressful to think about being in that situation, always having to be on alert and be ready to go and to lose, all of your physical possessions. So I just thought that was interesting to think about in that context, and honestly, how grateful I am that that's not a part of my life, but that, just to be aware that is a part of other people's lives. But that is my trip to Great Sand Dunes National Park. If you have comments or questions, just follow me on Instagram at JoyYugi. I have some reels from this trip too, and photos that you can check out. You can look at this podcast. You can follow it on YouTube if you want to watch it. Otherwise, I would love it if you would subscribe to this podcast and rate and review it. It'll help other people who want to learn about the national parks find the podcast. So thanks for listening. Talk to you next time, and I wish you happy travels wherever life is taking you.